My daughter's fiancé asked for a $400,000 loan. Then I found his secret Delaware LLC. Numbers have a peculiar way of telling the truth, even when the people attached to them are lying through their teeth. After 42 years as a certified public accountant in Chicago, navigating the murky waters of corporate tax returns and IRS audits, I learned one absolute rule. A man can fake a smile, he can fake a tailored suit, and he can certainly fake falling in love. But he cannot fake cash flow. I was thinking about that rule on a crisp Thursday afternoon in late October, standing on the sidewalk of Oak Street, just off the Magnificent Mile. The wind blowing off Lake Michigan carried the bitter chill of impending winter, but the cold I felt was entirely internal. In my right hand, I held a thick manila folder. Inside it were 40 pages of public records, tax filings, and corporate registry printouts. It was a dossier of deception. In exactly 10 minutes, I was going to walk into the bridal boutique behind me and use those papers to break my only daughter's heart. Sarah was 28, a talented graphic designer with a laugh that echoed her mother's. When my wife, Helen, passed away 5 years ago from ovarian cancer, the silence in our Beverly home had been deafening. Sarah had been my anchor. In her will, Helen had left Sarah the charming, ivy-covered Victorian house in Evanston where Helen had grown up. It wasn't just real estate. It was a sanctuary, paid off entirely, holding 3 generations of memories within its oak-paneled walls. Then came Julian. He swept into Sarah's life 8 months ago like a cinematic cliché. Julian was 32, supposedly a visionary tech entrepreneur. He wore Patagonia fleece vests over custom-tailored dress shirts, drove a leased Tesla, and spoke in a relentless stream of Silicon Valley buzzwords: synergy, scalability, disruptive paradigms. He was launching a healthcare logistics startup called Aegis Health Tech, and according to him, it was going to revolutionize the industry. Sarah, who saw the good in everyone and knew nothing about venture capital, was utterly captivated. I was less convinced. My skepticism wasn't just the protective instinct of a widowed father. It was the ingrained cynicism of a man who had spent decades watching smooth talkers try to write off personal vacations as business expenses. The real alarm bells didn't start ringing until a Sunday dinner at my house, exactly 6 weeks before the wedding. I had spent the afternoon roasting a chicken, an old recipe of Helen's. We were sitting at the dining room table. Julian was swirling a glass of Cabernet, holding court. The series of funding round is taking a little longer than expected to close, Julian said smoothly, reaching for Sarah's hand. The institutional investors are dragging their feet on the due diligence. But we have incredible momentum. Sarah and I were actually talking, and she's agreed to help bridge the gap. I stopped carving the chicken. The knife hovered above the platter. Bridge the gap? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Sarah smiled, a trusting, radiant look that made my chest physically ache. Julian's startup needs a short-term cash injection to secure the server infrastructure, Dad. Just for 90 days. We're going to take out a helic on the Evanston house. The equity is just sitting there doing nothing. Once the venture capital money clears, we pay it back, and Julian gives me a 5% equity stake in the company. A home equity line of credit on Helen's childhood home to fund a startup with no product, no revenue, and no visible board of directors. I see, I said, carefully setting the carving knife down. How much are you borrowing against the house, sweetheart? Julian answered before she could. $400,000. It's a completely standard bridge loan strategy, Arthur. High yield, zero risk. I wouldn't let Sarah do it if my own skin wasn't in the game. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. Decades of dealing with hostile IRS auditors had taught me that anger is a vulnerability. When you feel cornered, you don't raise your voice. You gather your paperwork. I simply nodded, poured myself a glass of water, and changed the subject to the Bears game. But that night, after they left, I didn't go to sleep. I went into my home office, turned on my desktop computer, and put on my reading glasses. If Julian was raising capital, there had to be a paper trail. I started with the basics. I went to the Delaware Division of Corporations database. Delaware is the corporate secrecy capital of the United States. Half the public companies in America are incorporated there because the state allows for anonymous LLCs, shielding the true owners' identities. I paid the nominal fee and pulled the franchise tax records and the entity details for Aegis Health Tech LLC. It had been registered exactly 7 months ago, 1 month before he met my daughter. There was no physical address listed, only the name of a registered agent service in Wilmington, a company whose sole purpose is to act as a mail drop for thousands of anonymous shell companies. That wasn't illegal, but it was a red flag. Real tech startups seeking institutional funding usually file as C corporations, not LLCs, because venture capital firms demand equity shares that LLCs aren't structured to easily provide. Next, I logged onto the SEC's EDGAR database. If Julian was soliciting investment for a private company, he was legally required to file a Form D to claim a Regulation D exemption under federal securities law. I typed in Aegis Health Tech, 0 results. I searched his full name, Julian Vance. 0 results. My heart rate slowed down, settling into the cold, rhythmic thud of a man preparing for a long fight. I wasn't an overprotective father anymore. I was a forensic accountant on the hunt. For the next 4 days, I barely left my office. I drank black coffee and built a spreadsheet. If Julian didn't have SEC filings, where was the money coming from? I ran his name through FINRA's broker check. Nothing. I used a premium public records aggregator I still had a subscription to from my firm days. I pulled property records, court dockets, and UCC financing statements. Then, I found the thread. Julian's name was listed as a secondary manager on another Delaware LLC that had been dissolved 2 years prior, Apex Senior Solutions. I cross-referenced that company name with federal court records in the Southern District of Florida. Bingo. Apex Senior Solutions had been named in a civil suit filed by the Florida Attorney General. It wasn't a tech company. It was a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that sold exclusive medical device distribution rights to retirees in Boca Raton. They took the seniors' pension money, used the new investments to pay off the early investors to create the illusion of returns, and funneled the rest into offshore accounts. The case had been settled out of court, buried under a mountain of non-disclosure agreements, but the structure was identical. Julian wasn't a tech visionary. He was a financial predator, and he had realized that courting a lonely, trusting woman with a paid-off, $500,000 asset was much easier than running a boiler room in Florida. He wasn't marrying Sarah. He was liquidating her. I printed the Florida court docket. I printed the Delaware registry proving his connection. I printed the SEC negative search results. I put them all in a manila folder. I felt a profound, suffocating sorrow, not for the fraud, but for my little girl. I knew exactly what this folder was going to do to her. I was going to shatter her world to save her life. Which brought me to the sidewalk on Oak Street. Inside the boutique, Sarah was having her final fitting. Through the plate glass window, I could see her standing on a circular pedestal, draped in white silk and lace. She looked exactly like Helen on our wedding day in 1983. My breath hitched. Julian was sitting on a plush velvet sofa nearby, holding a flute of champagne, smiling at her. It was a perfect, practiced smile. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The bell chimed softly. "Dad," Sarah beamed, turning carefully in the dress. "You made it. What do you think?" "You look breathtaking, sweetie," I said, and my voice didn't waver, even though my heart was breaking. I looked at Julian. "Julian, do you have a moment? I need to discuss something about the caterer with you outside." Julian checked his Rolex. "Sure thing, Arthur. Be right back, babe." He kissed Sarah's hand and followed me out the door. We didn't stop on the sidewalk. I led him into a high-end coffee shop 2 doors down. It was quiet, smelling of roasted espresso and wealth. We sat at a small corner table. Julian leaned back, crossing his legs. "So, what's the issue with the caterer, Arthur? If it's a budget thing, don't worry, I can have my assistant wire." "There is no issue with the caterer," I interrupted quietly. I laid the manila folder on the table between us. "But there is a significant issue with the Form D you never filed with the SEC." Julian's practiced smile froze. Just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. The muscles in his jaw tightened. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. My legal team handles the compliance." I opened the folder. I didn't rush. I turned the pages one by one, making sure he saw every highlight, every red circle I had drawn. "This is the Delaware registration for Aegis Health Tech LLC," I said, tapping the paper. "Registered via a shell drop box. No assets. This is the SEC database showing 0 Regulation D exemptions, meaning it is a federal crime for you to solicit institutional investment, which you claim to be doing. And this." I slid the thickest document forward. "This is the civil complaint from the Southern District of Florida regarding Apex Senior Solutions, the elder fraud scheme you helped run before you settled and fled north." Julian stared at the papers. The charismatic tech bro vanished, replaced by something cold, calculating, and cornered. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You've been spying on me, Arthur. What is this, some boomer power trip because you can't stand that your daughter doesn't need you anymore?" My daughter needs protection from a con artist who is trying to launder her mother's house into a non-existent company, I replied smoothly. My hands weren't shaking. I felt absolute, terrifying clarity. You know exactly what I am looking at, Julian. It's a variation of the same Ponzi structure. You take out the helic on her house. You bleed the $400,000 into your shell LLC under the guise of bridge capital. And in 3 months, the startup mysteriously fails due to market conditions. You walk away with the cash, and Sarah is left with a massive lien on a house she can't afford to pay off. The bank forecloses, and you disappear. Julian scoffed, looking around the coffee shop, trying to regain the upper hand. You think Sarah is going to believe this paranoid delusion? She loves me. She knows my vision. She loves the character you're playing, I corrected him. And you're right. If I just tell her, she might not believe me. Love makes people desperately blind. I closed the folder and rested my hands on top of it. But I don't need her to believe me. Because here is what is going to happen, Julian. You are going to walk back into that boutique. You are going to tell Sarah that you are calling off the wedding. You will tell her the pressure of the startup is too much, that you aren't ready for commitment, that you are moving to the West Coast. You will break her heart. You will take all the blame, and you will walk out of her life today. Forever. He laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. Or what? You'll show her these papers. No, I said softly. Or I will take this dossier, along with your sworn bank statements from the mortgage pre-approval, and I will drive directly to the Chicago field office of the FBI. I will ask to speak with the white-collar crime division. Then I will go to the Illinois Attorney General's office. I will hand them the paper trail that proves you are committing wire fraud and attempting to defraud a financial institution. You won't just lose the wedding, Julian. You will go to federal prison. The silence between us stretched out. The espresso machine hissed in the background. Julian looked at my eyes, searching for a bluff. He found nothing. A lifelong accountant knows exactly how to build an airtight audit. He knew I had him. He didn't scream. He didn't argue. Predators like him are fundamentally cowards. When the trap snaps shut, they just chew off their own leg to escape. Julian stood up, adjusting his Patagonia vest. His eyes were dead. Keep the ring. Consider it a consulting fee. He walked out of the coffee shop, turning left toward his car. He never went back into the bridal boutique. I sat there alone for 5 minutes. I let the adrenaline bleed out of my system, replaced by a profound, crushing sadness. I had saved her financial future. I had saved Helen's house. But I was about to walk into that shop and watch my daughter's world collapse. When I finally returned to the boutique, Sarah was still on the pedestal. She saw my face in the mirror and turned around, her smile faltering. Dad, where's Julian? I walked up to the pedestal. I didn't have the folder anymore. I had left it in the coffee shop trash can. She didn't need to see the ugly mechanics of the fraud. She just needed her father. Sweetheart, I said, my voice finally breaking. I reached out and took her hands. He's gone. The next few months were a blur of canceled deposits, tearful nights, and profound confusion. Sarah was devastated. She didn't understand how a man could just vanish. For a long time, she was angry at the world, and sometimes she was angry at me. I absorbed it all. I let her cry. I helped her pack up the apartment they were supposed to share, and I never, not once, said, I told you so. I never told her about the Delaware LLC, or the Florida Ponzi scheme, or the confrontation in the coffee shop. Some people might say I owed her the truth, but truth is a heavy burden, and she was already carrying enough weight. I took the betrayal upon myself so she could simply grieve a failed romance, rather than a malicious, calculated exploitation. A year later, we were sitting on the porch of the Evanston house. It was autumn again. The house belonged to her, safe and unencumbered. Sarah was holding a mug of tea, looking out at the yard. The color had finally returned to her cheeks. I'm glad we didn't sell this place, she said quietly, out of nowhere. I'm glad I still have it. I looked at the peeling paint on the porch railing, thinking of the numbers, the shell companies, and the lies. Then I looked at my daughter, safe and whole. Me too, sweetheart, I said. Me too.